Hello and welcome back to the Wasteland, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the 50 cal and how that's changed over the history of Fallout and the Fallout games. So you might be wondering why there's the 12.7mm being shown in the background right now. That is because 12.7 is technically 50 caliber. Now this actually isn't going to be the weapon that we're going to be talking about because the 12.7mm pistol is based off of the 14mm pistol from Fallout 2, and that's probably going to get its own video. But I did want to include it here because otherwise I'm naturally going to get comments saying 12.7 is 50 cal as well, which that is true. 12.7 is the metric because it's 12.7mm, and then 50 cal is 0.50, so that would be the Imperial measurement. So they are both the same, kind of, although the 50 cal, at least 12.7mm in Fallout New Vegas, is supposed to be like 50 caliber pistol, or 50 caliber AE, or 50 caliber Beowulf. There's a couple different 50 calibers that could be loaded into these weapons, as well as the 12.7mm pistol and the 12.7mm submachine gun aren't really based on any pistol or submachine gun in particular. Either way, let's talk about the 50 cal throughout the rest of the Fallout games and go for the big heavy hitting weapons. So the very first time the 50 cal actually showed up was not in Fallout 1 or 2, it didn't appear in either of those, but it would actually be in Fallout Tactics. And this would not be a 50 caliber sniper rifle like we would kind of associate it with. This is a 50 caliber machine gun. This is the Browning M2, it just straight up is. It's not even disguised as anything else, and it even says as much that it is a Browning M2. So this is a heavy machine gun, which would generally be mounted to a vehicle or a tank or an aircraft or something like that. You would generally mount this to something so that you could physically shoot it. In Tactics, you could actually pick this one up and fire it, which would probably be a really bad idea for you to be trying to do that for a couple of reasons. There's no stock to these weapons, so you're just going to have to be free-handing it, and it's going to have a lot of recoil. It does make sense, though, in Tactics, that the super mutants are the ones to use this, and it is a very devastating weapon in Tactics. It's one of the scariest weapons that you can run into because it's relatively early on that you can find these. Well, about midway through the game where the super mutants start showing up, and sometimes they will have these, and they can just 100 to 0 you, really regardless of how you want to build your character. There might be a chance that you survive it, but if you're at close range and they fire it at you, there's a good chance they'll just outright kill you no matter what your armor is, at least at that point in the game, because you can't have things like power armor at that point. Chems might help a little bit, and even if you had really high endurance and high HP, you still might actually die. It wouldn't be that uncommon for you to be killed by this. The inverse goes for this though too. It's very easy to kill just about anything with this. It does really high damage and it can rip right through the super mutants, which is the earliest time that you can get this. And it's even pretty good into the late game when you're fighting the robots because the 50 caliber can hurt them pretty easily too. Not as strong as some of the other options that you get for fighting robots because there is actually a bigger big gun than this thing. This is by far the most devastating big gun that you can get at this point in the game besides maybe the rocket launcher. But you do have the Gauss minigun, which shows up later in Tactics, and that thing is absolutely insane. So the 50 cal is actually not the endgame big gun. It does require the highest amount of strength out of any of the weapons in the game, though. It requires 9 in Tactics. So if you didn't have 9, you could still potentially wield this. However, the 50 cal itself is very heavy and its ammo is extremely heavy. You can't carry a whole lot of that around. And if you do have less strength to actually wield this, then it's going to be pretty inaccurate, which is not very good, especially since this thing actually has really long range. I think it has the second longest range out of any of the big guns. I think only the Gauss minigun has more than it. So the 50 cal made a big splash upon its first debut in Fallout. In New Vegas is when it would make its return, and this is probably the 50 cal that most people think of in Fallout. And this is maybe the strongest. It's hard to say between this and Tactics because the anti-material rifle you find in Fallout New Vegas is extremely devastating. This is a 50 caliber bolt action rifle. It holds 8 rounds. It does exceptionally high damage at 110. Since strength requirements were back, this one does require 8 strength, so it's not as heavy as the Browning M2, but it's still very heavy if you want to be wielding this. Meeting the strength requirement is good because then it won't sway as much, although if you're using this with explosive rounds, you could argue that that's not really that big of a deal because you don't need to be that accurate with it. Damage per second was fairly low for this weapon because the bolt cycle is fairly slow, although it can still be quite devastating shot for shot, so even hip firing this thing can be a valid strategy. This does really high crit damage at 110. It has a lot of action point cost. It's not really great for a VATS build, although again, if you hit with it, it's going to be devastating. It has extreme accuracy, and it actually has a lot of different ammos. It's also fairly heavy. This thing weighs 20 weight, and it doesn't have the highest amount of item HP, but you're probably not going to be using it very much. You probably won't need to use it very much, and if you have jury rigging, it's not a big deal because you can fix this up with any manual action gun, so any other bolt action, pump action, lever action, you can use those to feed to your anti-material rifle and pick off enemies. The anti-material rifle actually comes in two different varieties. You have the regular one and you have the gunner's arsenal one. Regular one, enemies can start popping up with later on into the game. Marksmen and the Lonesome Road can have this. Zion Tribals can have this. Hit squads can also have this. So it is a pretty scary weapon when it does pop up, because if you're playing on like the very hard hardcore, which is usually what I play on for New Vegas, even with a super tanky build, this thing can still like 2 or 3 shot you. It's pretty crazy. Maybe not so much if you have all the chems going. Then you might be able to survive, maybe 4 rounds. So that can be good. With the addition of ammunitions, it also had more than just the standard 50 cal round. Although even in tactics, there was more than the standard 50 cal round, where I think you had standard 50 and you had the armor piercing 50. So, or wait, no, it was depleted uranium rounds. I remember now. It was depleted uranium rounds, which I mean is armor piercing. But I think it's funny that they actually had that for it. In New Vegas, you could once again have armor piercing. This would slightly nerf your damage by like 5%, but it would give you 15 armor pen, which was enough to go through almost any armor in the game. That completely negates Deathclaw's armor. It almost negates Giant Rat Scorpion's armor. It negates most like light and medium armors. Not quite to heavy armor, but if you wanted to take armor piercing rounds in this, you absolutely could. You could make your own rounds with the match grade ammunition, which would give you even more accuracy and even more damage, but you did need 100 repair and you needed the handloader perk in order to get that. It was fun, but not entirely necessary. You had the incendiary rounds, which were just kind of weaker 50 cal rounds, but they did light enemies on fire, so it dealt damage over time. Sadly, this wasn't affected by the pyromaniac perk, otherwise it probably would have been pretty decent. Upside to the incendiary rounds, though, is that you could get them in the Lonesome Road in various boxes. And then you had the big devastating ones with the 50 cal explosive rounds. These ones were really, really good, and were pretty much the only 50 cal rounds that I usually use with it. It's extremely devastating, it's got great crowd clear, it does a lot of damage to enemies, even if it doesn't kill them outright. It likely will cripple their limbs or knock them on the ground or both, and it also makes it so follow-up shots are a little bit easier, although you don't want to be using this at close range because you might blow yourself up. On top of that, the 50 cal could also get mods, where it could get a faster bolt, which was good. It didn't make it that much quicker, but still a bonus. You had a suppressor on here, which didn't fully suppress it, but it made it more quiet, so again, kind of good. And then it had the carbon fiber parts, which I think were the best part of it, where it made it significantly lighter at 13 weight. This could also be affected by the heavyweight perk, and you could cut it in half. So you could go down to 6.5 weight at its lowest. So that was pretty good for the 50 cal. You could also just buy this at the Gunrunners, which is probably where you're going to get that, and then all the parts to it, all the upgrades. And it was an extremely devastating weapon. There wasn't anything else that took 50 cal rounds, only the anti-material rifle in New Vegas. Again, unless we're counting the 12.7, which we're not going to for this video. Moving from Fallout New Vegas, we got the 50 cal once again in Fallout 4, and it would be significantly worse than it had been in any of the other Fallout games. So there was only 2 weapons that could actually take the 50 caliber round in Fallout 4, that being the pipe bolt action rifle, which loading 50 caliber into a pipe bolt action rifle is probably not a good idea. That's probably a good way for that to explode. And it wasn't even that great of a gun anyway. It had a slow rate of fire. The 50 caliber upgrade was barely an upgrade over the 308. Usually you got like a base of 20 more damage to either this or the hunting rifle, which is just not very much, especially for the extra weight that 50 cal has if you're playing on survival mode. And it's just not a very common round. 50 cal is fairly hard to find in Fallout 4, at least compared to 308, which is one of the most common rounds that you can find. So it really fell off there, and I don't know of anybody who really wanted to use a 50 cal pipe rifle unless it had some sort of good effect. Like if you got an instigating one right away, then yeah, it's kind of going to be better than most other initiation weapons. So that is pretty good. Same thing goes with the hunting rifle. The hunting rifle would get a slight bonus over the standard 308 hunting rifle, but it really wouldn't be worth it all that much. Again, the 50 cal rounds are just more expensive. They're more difficult to find. This would be a better platform to be building up than the pipe rifle because it has better upgrades overall. You could do a couple different scopes, and it also had like suppressors on there, even though the other one did. It also just looks a whole lot better, even though the hunting rifle is left-handed or mirrored for some reason in Fallout 4. And there wasn't any set hunting rifles that were really good. There was no unique pipe bolt action rifles that you could find outside of getting them from random encounters. The hunting rifle is kind of the same thing because you only had like the Reba 1 and 2, which weren't anything special. The Exterminator's not really that great unless you get like a Mirelurk Queen and you just really want to kill it or something. But even then, like instigating would still be better than that. You could also potentially get the Tinker Tom Special, which was better for a VATS build, but not by that much, just better at hitting, which usually wasn't that big of a deal. So the 50 caliber would be substantially weaker in Fallout 4 than it had been in the previous games, which is kind of a sad place to leave off. We did actually get 50 caliber in Fallout London too, even though that one is not canon because that one is a fan-made one. And I think the only 50 caliber gun that you could get in that was the handmade rifle that could take 50 caliber explosive rounds, which was actually pretty good. At least that wasn't a unique weapon, because there was a couple other unique weapons too. The unique Martini Henry could take 50 caliber, and that was actually really strong. I did really like it. You could also make it very cursed if you wanted to put like other things on it, like you could put a red dot on your martini and it looks so out of place. There was like also the revolver that took 50 cal rounds as well as the Deagle. That was another one because there was a unique pistol that was a mishmash of a Desert Eagle upper part and a Makarov lower assembly. So it was definitely a cursed weapon. I think that one has appeared in a game called Hot Dogs and Hand Grenades, which has a whole bunch of cursed weapons in it. So it is kind of cool that we did see that back in Fallout London, and it was kind of funny that they put those particular weapons in. And there was actually some pretty strong 50 cal weapons in that, but we're not going to go into huge detail there because Fallout London, again, is not really considered canon, but it was funny that they appeared. So the 50 caliber, whether it was the strongest in Tactics or New Vegas, I think is up for debate. It would be really cool if you could get another M2 in the later Fallout games, especially if something like the Super Mutants could carry it around, because it kind of makes sense for them. In Tactics, the Super Mutants tended to carry around a lot of big guns like that. They carried around like M249 saws, M60s, Browning M2s, flamethrowers, rocket launchers, and then usually like melee weapons and grenades. They were actually a pretty big menace in that game. In New Vegas, there was still anything that carried around 50 cal was pretty scary. Marked men or tribals were probably going to be the most common ones, but at least you got a good price from actually killing them because 50 cal is worth a whole lot. So tell me your thoughts on the 50 cal and how it's changed throughout the years in Fallout. Which one is your favorite? Thank you guys so very much for watching this. Hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.